kingdom had been divided. The water was contaminated, the land barren. Kings ruled without listening to heaven, and the people learned to survive in silence. Then the heavens had moved. A mantle was left behind, and the word of the Lord began to walk among men once again. When Elisha arose, the waters were purified. Death retreated. Famine was confronted, and the impossible began to obey the voice of God. Pride was exposed. Kings trembled. Nations bore witness. And even the Jordan parted before the one who carried the word of the Lord. This is not just the story of a prophet. It is the testimony of the God who still works miracles. The miracles of Elisha, the eternal legacy. The sun poured over the hills of Israel like weary gold, touching ancient walls, fields divided by stone, and cities raised more by human strength than by the justice of God. It was the time of the kings, days when thrones were upheld by fragile alliances, and the faith of the people wavered according to the fullness of their storehouses and the sharpness of their swords. The gates opened at dawn, and with them went out a people accustomed to the sacred, yet distant from it. Altars still smoked, but the heart of the nation was divided. The name of the Lord was known, but not always obeyed. Kings spoke of authority, prophets of judgment. Between the two, the land groaned. In the distance, the Jordan followed its silent course, indifferent to human decisions. Its waters reflected the sky, yet carried the memory of ancient promises, crossings, covenants, miracles that seemed to belong to another age. The wind moved through the fields like a forgotten whisper, lifting dust from paths walked by generations who had learned to survive without listening. In the cities, order appeared firm. Soldiers stood watch, merchants traded, priests repeated rituals. Everything functioned. Everything seemed stable. But beneath the routine, something was rotting. Death visited homes without warning. Famine hovered over entire villages. Justice bent before power. And heaven, though present, remained silent.
We are strong. We have kings. We have walls.
The phrase echoed as a collective certainty, spoken without realizing it was a confession of pride. Humanity believed it had learned to rule without God. Meanwhile, outside the palaces and far from the crowds, a name had not yet taken center stage in history. A man walked among villages and dirt roads, carrying more weight than recognition. His calling was not yet proclaimed by trumpets, but it already burned like restrained fire. The world moved on, confident in its own order. Kings believed they controlled destiny. The people adapted to the silence. And precisely there, at the height of human stability, the heavens were preparing to intervene once more. For when humanity convinces itself that it no longer needs God, that is the moment God raises up a prophet. The day was still breathing when the wind changed. It was not sudden, nor violent, just different. It moved across the hills with an ancient weight, as if carrying a memory that did not belong to the earth, but to heaven. The trees creaked softly, and the sound seemed to insist where no one listened anymore. The Jordan flowed on, steady. Its waters reflected the pale light of morning, yet there was restlessness within them. The river that had once parted before past generations now only watched, as if once again awaiting the command of God. It was there that the calling drew near. The silence stretched longer than it should have. Time itself seemed to hold its breath. And then, without announcement, without spectacle, the sacred touched the ordinary.
How can I set this before 100 men?
The voice did not tear open the sky. It descended, dense, irrevocable. It offered no comfort. It offered responsibility. The calling did not come as honor, but as weight. His heart tightened. His feet remained firm on the river's edge. Before him, the impossible rose as both promise and test. It was not enough to follow. He had to inherit. It was not enough to walk. He had to continue what God had already begun.
May there be a double portion of your spirit upon me.
The request did not seek glory. It sought permanence. It was the cry of one who understood that without the presence of God, the mantle was nothing more than fabric, and the calling nothing more than vanity. And then it happened. Heaven broke its own order. The wind rose. Fire descended as a boundary between the human and the eternal. A chariot of flames crossed the space between worlds, separating what could remain from what had to depart. The sound was not one of destruction, it was of transition. And Elijah was no longer there. The emptiness settled in with force. Silence returned, heavier than before. Before the river, only the echo of heaven remained, and a mantle fallen upon the earth. His hands closed around the cloth. It weighed more than it appeared, not because of the material, but because of what it carried. Legacy does not choose who receives it. It only demands faithfulness from the one who accepts it.
Where is the Lord, the God of Elijah?
The question was not doubt. It was invocation. And when he struck the waters, the river obeyed. The currents split apart, opening a path where there had once been a boundary. On the other side, the sons of the prophets watched in silence. They had not heard the calling, but they saw its effect. The transition was complete. Heaven had not changed. The earth had not moved. But now the voice of God was walking among men once again. And the ministry of Elisha began. The first steps of the ministry did not bring applause. They brought resistance. Cities opened to him with caution. Some drew near in silence. Others watched from a distance, measuring every gesture, waiting for failure where they had once seen power. The name of Elijah still echoed among the prophets, and an unspoken question lingered in the air. Does the Spirit truly rest upon him? In Jericho, the problem was ancient. The walls still stood, but life within them was decaying. The water was bitter, the land barren. The people survived, but they did not prosper. The city bore the appearance of blessing and the taste of curse.
My lord, the situation of this city is good, as you can see, but the waters are bad, and the land is barren.
There was no accusation in their words, only weariness, the kind of pain that has learned to exist. His hands moved without haste. His eyes swept over the surroundings, not as one seeking human solutions, but as one who listens before acting. The request was simple: a new bowl, salt. Nothing that would impress kings, nothing that would convince skeptics. When he cast the salt into the spring, his voice did not compete for attention with the wind or with the people.
Thus says the Lord, I have healed these waters.
The miracle did not come with a roar. It came with permanence. The spring was changed. The land responded. The city breathed again. And the setting, once merely a witness, became living proof that God still intervened in history. But the confirmation did not end the conflict. On the road to Bethel, laughter broke the silence. Young, insolent voices repeated words without understanding their weight. They were not mocking only a man. They were mocking the calling, the spiritual authority, the God who had sent him. He stopped. His heart was not inflamed by wounded pride, but by zeal. What stood before him was not isolated irreverence. It was the reflection of a generation that had learned to laugh at the sacred. He turned and he spoke. The judgment did not come from his emotion, but from the word he carried. The result was immediate, hard, unavoidable. The road fell silent. The laughter ceased. The land once again responded to the weight of heaven. The news spread. Some feared, others hardened their hearts. Kings heard with suspicion, priests watched with reserve. The name of Elisha began to circulate not as a comfortable promise, but as a threat to the established order.
And then came the famine. In Gilgal, the scarcity was not abstract. It was in the empty pots, in the weakened faces, in the fear of making a mistake even when trying to eat. One careless act, a plant gathered without knowledge, a cry echoing among the prophets.
There is death in the pot.
The danger was real, the mistake human, the desperation collective. He drew near. His hands did not tremble. The request was once again simple: flour. Nothing mystical, nothing symbolic in the eyes of man. The food was restored, death retreated, life remained. Still, the tension did not dissolve. Each intervention heightened expectation. Each sign raised the risk. The more God manifested himself, the more the world reacted. The conflict was set. For when the Word of God walks among men once again, it does not only heal, it confronts.
The presence of the miracle does not silence the weight of the calling. It deepens it. The nights grew longer.
the road more solitary. Even where doors opened in reverence, the heart remained isolated. The prophet carried the name of God, but he did not carry constant companionship. The faith of others rested on his shoulders, and weariness accumulated where no one could see. Silence began to impose itself between one sign and another. There were days when no word came, no instruction, no vision, only waiting. And waiting, when it is not filled by the voice of God, weighs more than open confrontation. His gaze drifted toward the horizon while the city slept. The same houses that had witnessed power now rested in normalcy, as if nothing had happened. Heaven remained closed, not by absence but by decision. God was silent. His heart wavered between trust and exhaustion, not from doubt in the Lord, but from the weight of representing the Lord before an unstable people. Every step required discernment. Every silence had to be endured without explanation.
In Shunem, a house had become a refuge. A woman had perceived what many ignored. The presence of the sacred is not measured by constant signs, but by continual faithfulness. She prepared the room, the table, the rest. There, between simple walls, the prophet found repose. Yet even rest brought no answers. The calling did not pause at nightfall. The mind remained awake. When the child was born, the joy was brief. The promise seemed small, too intimate to carry narrative weight. But then came the day when silence became unbearable. The body collapsed. Breath ceased. Life withdrew without warning. There was no word from heaven. There was no explanation. Faith was tested in its cruelest place, the unexpected. Elisha went up to the room. He shut the door. The world was left outside. No audience, no expansion, only him, the motionless body, and the absence of an answer. His face touched the child, his hands stretched out, his entire body leaned in as a living plea. No words were recorded, only persistence, only surrender. Time dragged on between two possibilities, acceptance or intervention. The silence remained. And in that silence, faith did not cry out. It endured. For before heaven moves, the heart of the servant must decide whether it will continue to believe even when it cannot hear. Silence did not break with words. It broke with presence. The room remained closed, cut off from the noise of the world, yet the air within it began to change. There was no visible wind, no sudden light. Still something was moving, invisible, irreversible. Heaven had inclined its gaze. His body remained stretched out over the child. His hands did not withdraw. His faith did not negotiate. Every breath was supplication, every moment absolute surrender. And then life answered. The body that had been cold warmed beneath his touch. A slight spasm crossed the chest. A breath broke the space between death and existence. The child sneezed once, twice, 7 times, and opened his eyes. Death retreated without fanfare, like one who recognizes a greater authority. He rose slowly. His heart beat hard, not in triumph, but in reverence. The door opened. The world returned to the room.
Call the Shunammite woman.
When she entered,
Time seemed to stand still. Her eyes touched the impossible before her mind could comprehend it. Her son was alive, breathing, present.
Take your son.
There was no speech. There was no exaggerated celebration. The miracle spoke for itself. Heaven had answered silent faithfulness. But the response did not stop there. In days of famine, when scarcity had become collective and despair hovered even over the steadfast, the word moved again with power. Men brought little. Logic said insufficiency. Faith said obedience.
Feed the people.
The command seemed disconnected from reality. 100 men, 20 loaves, ears of grain still green. Uneasy glances crossed the room. Doubt nearly turned into rebellion.
How can I set this before 100 men?
The answer came simple, direct, unyielding.
Give it to the people, that they may eat. For thus says the Lord, they shall eat, and there will still be some left over.
The food was passed around. Hands reached out. The bread did not run out. The need was satisfied. The impossible became ordinary before the eyes of all. And then came the foreigner. Naaman did not carry hunger. He carried prestige. He did not seek survival. He sought healing. His body, marked by leprosy, exposed the limits of human power. His titles did not protect him. His authority did not save him. When the word reached him, it did not come wrapped in honor. There was no formal reception, no diplomatic gesture, only a command, far too simple for a man accustomed to greatness.
Go, wash yourself 7 times in the Jordan.
Resistance erupted. Pride flared. Logic protested. But necessity prevailed. He went down, entered the waters, once, twice, 3 times, until the 7th. When he emerged, his skin was restored, like that of a child. The disease was gone, and so was the pride.
Now I know that there is no God in all the earth except in Israel.
The miracle crossed borders. Kings heard, nations took notice. The name of the Lord was exalted beyond the boundaries of his people. Heaven had spoken, the earth had obeyed, and history could no longer pretend that nothing had happened. For when God intervenes, there is no room for doubt, only testimony. After the impact came the echo. The cities did not immediately return to what they had been. Something lingered in the air, not visible but felt. People spoke in lowered voices. Steps grew more cautious, not out of fear of the prophet, but out of awareness of God. Pride, though still present, no longer stood with the same firmness. In Samaria, where military strength seemed to guarantee security, the siege tightened like an invisible snare. Famine advanced. Desperation turned decisions into shame. The kingdom, which had trusted in walls and armies, now faced the limits of its own power. The king paced restlessly upon the walls. His gaze searched for solutions where arrogance had once lived. The cry of the people rose like a silent accusation.
No human strategy proved sufficient. The word came again, not as immediate comfort, but as a promise that demanded faith.
Tomorrow at this time there will be abundance.
The announcement sounded offensive in the face of misery. Some mocked, others fell silent, unable to believe or deny. The heart of the kingdom wavered between hope and disbelief, and the impossible happened without direct confrontation. The enemy departed during the night, overtaken by confusion they could not understand. The fields were left empty, the tents abandoned, the provisions untouched. Deliverance did not come by sword, but by invisible intervention. At dawn, the people went out. The famine gave way. The city breathed again. The word was fulfilled with absolute precision. The king, once hardened, now bowed before the evidence, not in a public speech, but in silent recognition that control had never belonged to him. In other homes, far from the palace, restoration took on an intimate form. The Shunammite smiled again. The child ran through the corridors. Life, which had been given back, now had to be lived. The servant who tried to claim the miracle for himself was exposed. The leprosy that had left Naaman found another body. Justice manifested itself without haste, yet without error. Each consequence found its place. The prophet continued walking, not as the center of the story, but as a living witness to a God who restores, corrects, and sustains. Where there had been chaos, order emerged. Where there had been despair, reverence took root. Restoration did not erase the memory of suffering, it redefined it. For when God acts, He does not merely resolve the present, He reorients the heart toward what comes next.
Time moved on, but what had been done was not lost with it. The roads still held invisible traces of prophetic footsteps. The cities, even as they returned to routine, carried a silent memory. Something had changed forever. The name of Elisha continued to be spoken, no longer as novelty, but as reference, not because of human strength, but because of the constancy of the God who walked with him. Kings still rose and fell. Wars still emerged. Human history remained unstable. Yet there was now a fixed axis amid the chaos, the certainty that the Lord remained active among men. Even after death, the testimony did not cease. A body was hastily thrown into a tomb. Danger was drawing near. There was no ceremony, no honor, only necessity. And when it touched the bones of the prophet, life returned. The dead man rose. The impossible happened once more, not by living presence, but by spiritual legacy.
The earth confirmed what heaven had already declared. The prophet passed on. The God of the prophet remained. The people learned, slowly, that miracles were not distant memories, but living signs of divine faithfulness. That heaven had not closed, that the Word was still walking among them. The stories crossed generations. They were told around the fire, whispered in times of crisis, remembered when hope seemed far away, not as legend, but as testimony. For the God who purified waters, multiplied bread, restored lives, and humbled kings was not bound to the past. He still acts, he still responds, he still raises up those who trust in him. And so the legacy did not belong to Elisha, but to the one who sent him. For the God who worked through the prophet is the same, yesterday, today, and forever.